So thanks for those of you who are coming into the room. We'll just give people another minute to join and then we can start the session. Okay, great. I think we'll go ahead and start this session. We're really excited to have the opportunity to participate in the London Global Cancer Week. This session will be highlighting the Program for Advancing Research Capacity, or PARC, which is an exciting initiative within SIOP. So I'm Carl Allen from Texas Children's Hospital, Baylor College of Medicine, and I'm currently the chair of the PARC committee. So today we'll go over a brief introduction of the rationale, the need, and the early exciting accomplishments of the PARC program. And then we'll look for some examples of success from the Gallup group, looking at transforming vision into impact, how PARC is building pediatric oncology research capacity in Latin America, and Dr. Milena Villarreal will present that. And then we'll look to the India group, looking at making a difference, outcomes, and impact from a decade of work with the Indian Pediatric Hematology Oncology Group. And this will be Dr. Ramandeep Singh Arora. And then Grish Chinnaswamy, who's the co-chair, who co-leads the PARC committee with me, will lead us in a discussion about how we can make the biggest possible impact with this initiative. PARC was the brainchild of Guillermo Chantada and colleagues within SIOP. And they really came up with the idea to create a committee to really work on increasing the impact of advancement of pediatric cancer research in lower and middle income countries. And so currently I'm the chair. Grish Chinnaswamy, as I mentioned, is the vice chair. And I wanted to highlight we have pediatric cancer experts from around the world. And I've highlighted here Alejandra Mendez, who's a patient advocate. She's a mother of a survivor of childhood cancer, and we think it's really important to have her voice as well as the groups that she represents. Notably, since 2021, SIOP has raised 1 million euros of funds for the PARC program. This is an incredible accomplishment. Relatively similar amount as an single NIH grant, and you'll see that the global impact of this funding has been really incredible so far. So why does PARC exist? We're really working to bridge the gap in childhood cancer survival. All the advances that have been made in cancer have been made through research, and we think this is essential that we include research as a component of improving outcomes for children in both high income and middle income countries. And we need to have research that specifically focuses on low and middle income countries where most of the cancer patients relied. And in direct application of treatment regimens used in high income countries frequently is not appropriate or feasible or achieving the best outcomes in other environments. Reasons for this, as we all know, include late diagnosis and misdiagnosis, treatment abandonment, inadequate diagnostic capabilities, deficient supportive care, and comorbidities such as malnutrition or chronic infections. If we can't overcome these obstacles, it's very difficult to achieve optimal outcomes. And these are challenges that are specific to certain environments. So again, this is the curve that we all recognize that probably inspired a lot of us to get into pediatric cancer, where survival in leukemia in the 1970s, early 60s and 70s was nearly universally fatal, where now we're over 90%, as we even have another curve up here with blinatumomab. And each one of those advances was made through research. So again, we think it's essential that we create research capacity to improve outcomes for all children. So cooperative groups in childhood cancer have created relevant networks and collaborations within regions, carried out series of pragmatic clinical trials, usually with limited funds and huge efforts of participating healthcare personnel donating their time and efforts. And this has advanced the research and treatment in childhood cancer. However, these efforts need to be scaled up to make the biggest impact and reach every child with cancer. So in 2021, SIOP decided to focus on childhood cancer research throughout the PARC program. And so this experiment really called for a global applications for networks to apply for funding. And the funding in this case was really quite specific. It wasn't for a particular project, it wasn't for a hypothesis-driven scientific question, but it was how can you improve your impact through structural improvements in your clinical research capacity. And so within Africa, the CanCare Africa was funded. We'll hear about the Gallup experience. We'll hear about the INFOG experience, and POEM group in Asia remains ongoing. So you can see here that we initially have supported 4 groups that have represented major areas in the world where we can make a huge impact. So CanCare Africa was looking at multidisciplinary regional cooperative group in sub-Saharan Africa. They had 12 hospitals. You can see some of the countries represented here. And you can see here the topics, again, are really meant to enhance research capacity. So formalizing and expanding research infrastructure, looking at data management, looking at completion of prospective clinical trial data, and completing development of competitive research proposals. We'll hear about Gallup, so I'm not going to go too much into it, but to see that the scope of this network is really quite large and continues to grow. And again, the aims were really to create enhanced research capacity of an existing network in this case. Again, we'll hear about INFOG, which was created in 2008, now has remarkably over 50 centers. And part of this work is, as we'll hear about, is linking those centers and the capacity of those centers through clinical research. And then POEM was a cooperative research group in the Middle East. You can see all the different centers here. Again, this was sort of the beginning of mapping exercises across these really quite a large number of groups with different capacities and trying to link them through a common research network. So you can see here Guillermo Chantada and Kathy Pritchard-Jones, who initiated SIOP, have written the rationale and some of the early success of this. And I need to mention Tessie Lobb, who keeps everything together and is really the person who drives all of the progress within the PARC committee. And so one thing we're doing now is looking at, did PARC make an impact? Can we adjust our RFA? Is the funding sufficient? What were the experiences of the different institutions? So we've hired a consultant to help us look at these data that we'll look at in a rigorous way and publish for peer review in the near future. So at the same time, we began round 2, which is investing in additional development projects. So we received 11 proposals, 3 of which were approved. And again, these are each 7,500 euros with a 2-year duration. And we reinvested in some programs that were continuing on a trajectory of progress, as well as investing in a new group in Asia. So looking forward, the future of PARC really is to develop regional clinical research networks to link the networks that exist already. I think what this will also create is the PARC Global Collaborative Network will be attractive to pharma as a place to invest in rigorous testing for indications outside of the US and Europe. It'll also be an opportunity to look at high volume clinical trial opportunities where it could have access to many more patients than conventional approaches to looking at a few sites in the US and Europe. And then it's also will create clinical research careers for rising stars. I should mention, as part of PARC with collaborations with some of our collaborators, we've been able to support research for young investigators within this network. But again, the point of all of this, Zoom meetings and connections across the world is to improve the outcomes for these children. So our question over the next hour is going to be, how can we take advantage of PARC to make the biggest possible impact over the next 10 years? And again, I just wanted to kind of thank the funders, Amazon and Foundation S, that have made all of this possible. Okay. Again, thanks so much for joining us. We're going to start now by getting a couple real-world examples of how PARC is making an impact. And we'll start off with Dr. Milena Villarreal, who will represent the Gallup Network.
Thank you very much, Carl. In the next few minutes, I would like to share with you how PARC is building pediatric oncology research capacity in Latin America, transforming vision into impact. To begin, a little bit of context. Gallup was founded in 2008 with the support of the Children's Oncology Group to provide leading centers in Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Uruguay with a shared platform to participate in high-quality international trials. Although many of these institutions were already collaborating internationally, with groups such as BFM or SIOP or St. Jude, they had never worked together as a regional network. During this period, also, the terms of a constitution were discussed to formalize this group structure. Our first study, our first official study, was the osteosarcoma protocol, which was already underway in Brazil and was adopted as Gallup's inaugural trial. Soon after, we began developing regional Ewing sarcoma protocol, making the beginning of a truly Latin America research agenda. In line with its original mission, Gallup joined the Children's Oncology Group multi-center trial for extraocular retinoblastoma and quickly became the top enrolling region. This collaboration allowed our centers to gain critical experience and in international trial conduct and demonstrated early on that Latin America was committed and had the capacity to contribute to high-quality global research. Locally advanced disease diagnosis is common in many developing countries, and South America was not an exception, and has long been a major challenge in pediatric oncology. So, building on early collaborations with the Children's Oncology Group and Europe experts, Gallup designed the 2011 Ewing sarcoma study that marked a significant shift from participating in external protocols to developing and conducting our own independent regional trials. This effort sought to define the best treatment strategies for our population and also strengthen the international collaboration within Latin America, introducing innovative approaches tailored to our regional realities. The Gallup-Ewing sarcoma trial was a turning point because it demonstrated that independent multicenter research in Latin America is not only feasible, but capable of producing outcomes comparable to leading international groups. This study helped standardize treatment across our region and significantly strengthened local research capacities. Since its creation in 2008, Gallup has evolved into one of the leading multinational cooperative groups in Latin America. Beyond the Ewing sarcoma trial, our investigators have developed locally designed treatment protocols for osteosarcoma, retinoblastoma, along with translational studies in neuroblastoma. These initiatives specifically address questions that directly impact mortality, morbidity, and quality of life for children with cancer in Latin America, placing Gallup at the forefront of locally relevant clinical research. By 2021, Gallup had grown to 34 institutions across Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, and Chile. Together, these centers enrolled more than 2,000 patients in clinical trials, 500 of them in randomized studies. These results were highly encouraging. Our outcomes were comparable with international standards, and the data we generated addressed clinical questions relevant also to other countries with similar developmental problems or challenges. This demonstrated not only feasibility, but also the real scientific contribution for Latin America. Despite, sorry, I don't know, I cannot, here. Despite these encouraging results, our outcomes comparable to international standards Gallup approached its 15th anniversary facing significant challenges in consolidating our growth. We continue to rely heavily on principal investigators' self-funding efforts. Many centers struggled with barriers for participation, and resources for basic and translational research remained extremely limited. This reflects a common dilemma across developing countries. Opportunities often depend on external protocols, while the questions we most urgently need to answer, our own regional priorities, rarely receive dedicated funding. In this context, a virtuous synergy emerged through SIOP's creation of PARC, designed to strengthen the global capacity for research. Gallup competed successfully and secured both PARC 1 and PARC 2. For the first time, we had dedicated funding to address our administrative, regulatory, and research challenges at a true regional scale, making a major turning point in our development. PARC 1 was launched in November 2022 in partnership with Fundación Pérez Cremini in Uruguay, which provided essential administrative support. The overarching goal was to consolidate Gallup as a formal institution fully compliant with local laws and international research regulations. And it was also important to strengthen the structures needed for sustainable, high quality, pragmatic clinical research across the region. This was the foundation that allowed Gallup to operate with greater autonomy, transparency, and long term stability. Through PARC 1, Gallup formalized its status as a civil society organization in Uruguay. This was a crucial milestone because it allowed us to manage funds independently. We couldn't do that before. And to establish standardized collaboration agreements, as well as data and materials transfer frameworks. These structures now support our way of doing research in a transparent, efficient, and legally compliant partnership across the region. A key achievement of PARC was the ability to hire dedicated study and data coordinators. Gallup had never before had the administrative staff or the funding to support these roles on a sustained basis. Their incorporation has been transformative, greatly improving coordination, data quality, and the overall capacity of our research network. With the support of this new team, Gallup expanded its research portfolio to include studies on renal tumor, histiocytosis, and hepatic tumors. This growth not only broadened our scientific scope, but also strengthened collaboration across Latin America, enabling institutions from Central America and additional South American countries to participate and benefit from shared regional research. Building on the success of PARC 1, our 2024 proposal focuses on three major areas. The first is deepening collaboration with national and multinational cooperative groups in Latin America. Working in partnership allows us to develop solutions that respond to real regional needs, integrated capacity building, education, and risk-adapted treatments tailored to local contexts. A major milestone was the signing of the Gallup-CLEOP collaboration agreement in July 2025. Through this consortium, we aim to pool resources and expertise to develop unified strategies for trial design, regulatory navigation, and for overcoming the resource constraints that limit research across the region. Our second objective is to integrate more Latin American institutions through retrospective studies. Building on the success of our Ewing sarcoma protocol, we are proposing a retrospective study as an entry point for centers with limited experience or fewer resources. This will allow them to practice structured data collection and analysis within a supported framework. And these institutions will be able to participate in future prospective trials, creating a solid foundation for improving pediatric oncology care across the region. Our third objective is the active engagement of patients, families, and civil society organizations as true stakeholders in clinical research. To formalize this role, we will sign collaboration agreements with civil society organizations, develop fundraising activities, offer workshops to help patients and families understand the research process and the benefits of it, and to implement also a communication strategy that highlights the importance of civil society in pediatric oncology research. At the same time, we will seek synergies with charitable organizations to identify shared opportunities for fundraising and partnership. It is very important for us to build a sustainable income stream that can be centrally managed and strategically directed to Gallup's priority areas to strengthen our long-term institutional structure. Over the past 18 years, Gallup has evolved into a group capable of leading high-quality studies that shape the regional research agenda. This shift has allowed us to generate evidence that truly improves outcomes for children with cancer across Latin America. Our vision now, with the help of a PARC program, is to consolidate Gallup through sustainable infrastructure and full financial and administrative autonomy. We aim to bring even more Latin American centers into our network, ensuring that no child or adolescent in the region is left behind from the benefits of high-quality clinical research. This, we think, is the foundation for a truly equitable pediatric oncology landscape in Latin America. To finish, we are grateful for the opportunity that PARC program has offered us. And personally, I'm deeply proud and grateful to represent this group. Everything we have achieved is thanks to the extraordinary individuals and teams who work tirelessly to build a better future for children and adolescents with cancer in Latin America. Thank you very much for your attention.
Great. Thank you so much, Milena. That was a fantastic overview of the history of Gallup and really the potential for PARC to kind of accelerate progress and impact through this program. So we'll have some more specific questions from Dr. Chinnaswamy later. So now we're going to move to Dr. Singh Arora, who's going to tell us about his work with the Indian Pediatric Hematology and Oncology Group.
Thank you, Carl, and good evening, everyone. I hope you can see my slides.
Yes, they look great.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, excellent. Thank you. So the Indian Pediatric Hematology Oncology Group is grateful to be given the opportunity to present some of its work here. And of course, we are immensely grateful to SIOP PARC for being our strong supporters. Just to give you the context of the organization, this all started in 2007 when SIOP was hosted in Mumbai in Tata Memorial Hospital and the other hospitals there. And that was where this idea of a collaborative group, which Carl talked about, the importance of a collaborative group took place. And in 2008, the first meeting took place in New Delhi, where INPOG, as it was used to be known at that time, was conceived. And you may recognize some familiar faces over here. But it's really in 2015 that the work started. So it took a few years for the organization to grow to a stage where work started in 2015. And then following an informal collaborative effort, finally in 2021, December, we were able to become a legal entity, which is now called INFOG, or the Indian Pediatric Hematology Oncology Group. And I'm giving you this context so that it helps you understand how our journey has moved on during this time period. And so the reason why INFOG exists is to improve the outcomes of children with cancer and blood disorders in India using collaborative research as a tool. And we want to accelerate the development of prospective multi-center clinical trials, which is our primary aim. So what I'm going to do is in the next 5-10 minutes, present to you a decade's journey. And the way we've done it is we've looked at some of the inputs. So what has gone into InFog to get it to produce good work. And so for the first 6-7 years, as I mentioned, we were InPOG, we were not a legal entity. And so we had some executives, some of our clinical colleagues, but we really did not have any operational staff. We did not have any funds to give to anybody in any hospital. And we did not have any staff employed in any of the hospitals. But we were still able to do work. And the reason for that was the passion and the interest and the commitment of the individual clinicians in the hospitals to be part of this. So that is how we started. In the last 4 years, after creation of our legal entity, we now have, of course, the ability to get funds. And we now have directors and we have 3 operational staff, and we are able to support 27 hospitals with some staff. And I have to acknowledge and thank SIOP PARC, both round 1 and round 2. As you can see, the first money grants we received was from SIOP PARC. So it was such a timely intervention for us to be able to do the work we want to do. Now, with these inputs, we were able to conduct various activities. And so even 10 years ago, when we did not have much funds, we were still able to create a framework, starting with a very simple study roadmap as to how do you go about doing a multi-center study and following a process within InFog. We were able to create subcommittees, and these have gradually expanded to 25 subcommittees. So you've got the hematological group in the yellow, and you've got the solid tumors in the green, and the benign hematological disorders in the purple, and then finally in the blue you have some transdisciplinary subcommittees, and each of them have members and chairs. And then we started with SOPs on board of directors, and SOPs on authorship, and SOPs on subcommittees, and how do you become a delegate, and so on. So giving shape to the organization. Interesting evolution for us has been our databases. And so on the x-axis, you have the first 10 studies, and then the next 10 studies, and the third 10 studies, and so on. And what you will find is that as we matured as an organization, we weaned off Microsoft Excel, and we slowly even weaned off Google Forms, which were free and cheap and easily available and accessible to everybody. And now we are moving towards RedCap and Resonance. So that improves the quality of data, but it has taken us some time to get there. It was not automatic. We communicated regularly with everybody. So we produced few newsletters every year. This is the latest one we have. So 27 newsletters over the last decade. And then since the last 5 years, when we became a legal entity, we could actually start signing MOUs. And I'll show you this in a map subsequently. But today we have 59 member institutions that have signed MOUs, and we have staff who are trained monthly on a virtual platform, and annually. In fact, later this week, they are meeting for a 2-day training event in the city of Manipal. So with all this activity happening, thanks to the funds generated through SIOP PARC and other donors, we started to produce certain outputs. And of course, the first output is the studies. So the number of studies today, ongoing or completed, is 38. And these are all multi-center studies. These all have at least 5 centers or more. Not surprisingly, the initial studies were more retrospective and more observational, and our interventional studies were approximately a third of the total portfolio. But this also is changing with time, and now we have more and more phase 2 studies and more in randomized control studies coming through. And this, in a simple way, illustrates the number of centers who have participated in one or more InFog studies. So from 2014, when of course there was no InFog study, year on year, more and more centers have participated and contributed patients to one or more InFog studies. And today in 2025, we have 164 centers who have till date participated in the 38 InFog studies. But also very encouragingly is that out of these 164, 59 have become member institutions of InFog, and they have signed MOUs, highlighting commitment not only at the individual level, but also at the organization level. And that then allows us to fund staff for them. It allows us to provide resources to them because there's a buy-in from the hospital, not just from an enthusiastic physician. So with this output, we started getting some results. So till date, 26,088 children have been enrolled in one or more of these 38 in these 38 studies. And what you will see on the graph on the right side is that the number of interventional studies, or the number of patients on interventional studies, was holding steady around 1,000, which is the orange bar, and the number of overall patients in studies was, reaching a higher number. Now, what I would like to point out over here, and that is thanks to SIOP PARC and other donors, and it also illustrates the point as to what happens when you get formal funding. Our formal funding and our bank accounts have happened in the last 3 to 4 years. And what you see an upsurge in the amount of patients being recruited. So now for 2 years running, we are able to recruit 5,000 plus patients per year in the portfolio of our studies. And we believe that this is going to go higher. We are also in the interventional study group getting close to 2,000 patients in this year, because this data is a month old. So we are encouraged by this progress, and we hope that this is going to go further. But at the same time, we are now focusing in parallel at quality, and it's something which I'll touch on towards the end of my presentation. So not surprisingly, when you do all this work, papers get published and you get cited. I've just given you an example of 3 highly cited papers from our portfolio of 23 papers. So finally, coming to the impact, because all of this is being done to make a difference to children with cancer in our country and with blood disorders in our country, and see how we can do that. So this is something which we have tried to assess. For those of you who are from high income countries are familiar with the commonly quoted figure of 60, 70, 90% of children enter onto clinical trials. So you are trying to ascertain how many of children in India are able to enter onto a clinical trial. And if we take the denominator of 76,805 0 to 19-year-old children with cancer every year in the country, and we look at the number of children who have entered into INFOC studies, you will see today around 2% of children in India are entering onto a multi-center interventional study, and 7.5% are entering into some kind of observational intensive study. So of course we have a long way to go, but we started from zero. And so that is a good way of assessing the progress which we have made over the last decade. The other way to check our progress is, well, WHO tracer cancers, how are we doing there? Because we want kids to be with these diseases to be getting treatment on clinical trials. And what you see over here is R stands for retrospective and P stands for prospective. So we've had multiple retrospective and prospective studies for each of the WHO index tracer cancers. This is published data on outcomes of certain childhood cancers from India, from INFOG studies. And I don't want to necessarily take you through all the data, but what I want to talk about is this part, which is each of these studies is in multiple centers and has large cohort sizes, which allows us to then say, well, it's not just a single center outcome data, it is a data from multiple centers and is more generalizable and applicable for the rest of the country. So this has been another impact of ours. So in conclusion, INFOG is working on improving outcomes of childhood cancer and blood disorders through collaborative research. We are evolving and we are growing. Our metrics, which we are measuring, suggest that whatever we are doing is making a difference. Of course, there's a lot of things to do. And the next steps include continued growth, sustainability, quality, governance, including the patient-carer voice. And so with that, I would like to thank the patients and families who've been part of this, the investigators, subcommittee members, boards, advisors and mentors, and collaborators and donors, and a couple of people from the operations team, Tanya and Nikita, who helped me with the slides. And of course, starting with SIOP PARC and acknowledging all the other collaborators and donors. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much. I think both those talks really highlight the amazing vision from these pioneering institutions that got these networks started, the progress and the impact and the potential for future impact. And I think with that, I'll hand off to Girish Chinnaswamy, again, my partner leading the PARC committee. Girish works at Tata Memorial Hospital, so he's in the middle of all of this, the volume, the promise, and the progress. And I look forward to the discussion with this group. So, Grish, you can take it from here.
Yeah, thanks, Carl, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all of you who have joined online for the London Global Cancer Week session from SIOP committee. Before I progress further, I would like to just remind all our attendees that you could put your questions up in the chat section. There's a Q&A section. You could put your questions up and for the panelists, and we would take your questions as and when they come in as well. First of all, I would like to congratulate both Milena and Ramandeep for their excellent work and also presenting so well, putting more than a decade of work in 15 minutes and explaining how both organizations have grown. And more importantly, both of you have made the organizations into legal entities which can actually take research forward, which probably is the right way most cooperative groups should go, that you now have a legal entity on your own, which makes it easier to actually conduct studies and sponsor studies as well. I would like to, while questions come by, I would like to first ask Milena. Milena, you have showed us 2 decades of work and such amazing work done from the 4 countries in Gallup. Some very high-level research work from 2006 onwards, with collaboration with collaborative groups like Children Oncology Group as well. So my first question is, I mean, being an international organization, because you're the international organization with multiple countries in your group, every country you must be having different research priorities, which each of the country oncologists would want to research on. So how do you actually come to a consensus, or how do you actually set a priorities that the whole Gallup can actually take this forward?
What we have done is, for a start, to implement some meetings, virtual meetings, with across many countries in Latin America, to discuss and plan for treatment strategies, or to evaluate different problems that arise within national and cooperative group settings. In these meetings, we have also discussed what would be the best strategy, or we have established the priority to address next steps for Gallup. For example, we are now ending the draft of the new Ewing sarcoma protocol, but we also have addressed the issue that some institutions do not have the capacity right now to be part of this prospective study. So we have, with PARC's help, we have started a retrospective study so that we can support these countries to afterwards be part of the prospective study. So we have just listened to everybody, include them in the discussion, and then we have taken some steps forward.
Right. Thanks, Milan. I think you bring out a very important point, that inclusivity is very, very important, so that every partner in the group actually feels that they are heard and part of the process, even though all centers may not participate in an interventional trial, but could participate in many of the retrospective studies. I think you highlighted a very important point where everybody feels part of the process. The same question to Ramandeep as well, but you are at a national level and do not have issues of actually collaborating at an international level, which Milena or Gallup is facing. Nevertheless, the country itself is extremely diverse, with a very heterogeneous healthcare system in India, with some centers being very advanced to many, many centers not able to do basic supportive care for delivery of cancer care. Now, you highlighted that there are 164 centers and more than 60 are actually members of the Pediatric Oncology Group of India. So my question to you is, how do you set research priorities here? so that people don't feel left out, and that some of the and you're only setting research priorities which can be conducted by the larger centers, and the smaller centers don't feel part of it, especially if they do not have adequate infrastructure. So how do you balance that? Where is the soft spot?
Thank you, Girish. And as you rightly said, that we have a heterogeneous healthcare system, and so both in volume and in patient financing and so on. So we have to try and find a balance. And there are a few principles by which we are guided. And so the first principle which we are guided by is to try and improve access to as many patients as possible. So if we use that principle, then we have to find solutions to the heterogeneity and how do we make that happen. And Milena gave a good example where you could have a parallel retrospective study and a prospective study. And in the case of India, as you know, our first ALL study called ICICLE, which was opened only in 5 tertiary centers, then became a implementation study. So now we actually have 2 prospective interventional studies going on. There is the implementation study going in 20 to 25 centers, which were new to this project. At the same time, in parallel, there is ICICLE 2, which is a randomized controlled trial study open in 5 to 6 centers. So that is one way of addressing the needs of certain centers which want to try and find answers to questions which need answering, and at the same time, it does not leave anybody behind. So that's one way to address that. The other is that we want people to we want to encourage research. It may or may not be research within the Indian Pediatric Hematology Oncology group. So if from the skills and the resources and the time which they spend, they are able to start single center studies, or they're able to do their own smaller group studies, those are also welcome and encouraged. At the end of the day, it's all about improving access to patients and improving outcomes. The final piece I want to say is, and this is something which Milian also talked about, is that very often the prioritization of research and what is important is felt to be exclusively the domain of clinicians. And we recognize the importance of bringing the voice of the patient and the carer. And I mentioned this in my last slide, but I didn't elaborate on it. And so what we are doing is we are finding a way to bring in patient opinion. So it could be on out-of-pocket expenditure, it could be on how to communicate or how to counsel or how to withdraw care and so on. So those areas which would not necessarily be very glamorous areas to study in the field of research, but are important for the patient and the stakeholders and the carers, are also some things we want to look at. So that is how we're trying to balance the situation in front of us. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Ramandeep. I think you brought the important point of getting patients and patient advocates into the system, which we may touch upon later. Milena, I also want to ask you that since you're dealing with across geographic borders, as in international borders, how do you get approvals? What are the regulatory and ethical issues which you face, which seems to be one of the biggest barriers, mental barriers for people to take on international research, because they feel that it is such a big hurdle to cross through different government barriers and get approvals. How do you address that? And what is a rough timeline to start a project from writing the protocol to actually implementing the research project?
Well, to begin with the timeline, it has been very different for studies before PARC than for studies after PARC implementation, and part support and the implementation of this administrative and regulatory structure. As we are now including a lot more countries and institutions, we have thought that maybe the best strategy is to use the help of study coordinators. That's one for Portuguese speaking country, that's Brazil, and the other for Spanish speaking countries. They actively engage with teams that are going to seek for approval, and they support every need from the not only from the global study perspective, but from their national regulation. But we have also, with the help of lawyers that are experts in research, for example, that work for Flaxo in Argentina, we have developed some data transfer agreement templates that can be easily adapted to local regulation. But when we were developing these templates, we always thought of not of going to every country's particular regulation, but to look for the most strict regulation nowadays, because countries are evolving. If they do not have certain restraints now, they will do in the near future. So we're aiming to European and American standards of data transfer agreements and material transfer agreements, so that we can just level up the pediatric cancer research regulatory system in Latin America.
Thanks, Milan. I think that's a very key point you brought out, that actually you make the toughest regulations and made the data agreement based on that, so that all other countries would find it easier who have got a less tougher regulatory process in place. I think that's a very key and a very clever way to actually get things done faster. And also the fact that you use different language speaking trial personnel to deal with different countries is another very important aspect. So coming back to Ramandeep, I think one of the issues, Ramandeep, is for conduct of clinical trials is obviously the need for funds. I mean, I'm not talking of the PARC kind of capacity fund, but just to conduct of a trial. How is the funding available for you in India? And I'll come to Milena as well later. How do you secure funds for conduct of your clinical trial? The icicle trial, which you said was more than 2,600 children enrolled onto it. So how do you secure funds, and what do you see are the hurdles for securing research funds in India?
So each country has certain unique systems, as well as then there are things which are common to everyone. And I want to point out a distinction, which is that one can secure funds for a study, and that would the responsibility so far has lied primarily with the PI who's designing the study. What INFOG has done so far is it has not raised study-specific funding, but it has raised funding for capacity overall. So a hospital may have more than one or two studies, and then the person employed or the resources provided allow each of the studies to happen regardless of the study. So we've gone about it in different ways. Now, so far, many of the studies have acquired funding in the case of the PI, either through government sources like the Indian Council of Medical Research, or quasi-governmental sources like the National Cancer Grid. The number of studies getting funds from pharma and industry is much, much smaller, but that's the other avenue. And then, of course, there is the option of having philanthropists give funding, which again is right now a very small component of the whole work. Then individual institutions, Tata being one example, have long-standing collaborative networks with national and international organizations, and they can, apply for funds through that. Specific to India and the challenges which we face is that, and I'll take INFOG's example over here, which is that it is interesting that when you set up an organization, a not-for-profit organization, you're trying to develop the organization with your hands tied behind your back, because the rules say that after 3 years of existence and filing tax returns, then you are eligible to apply for foreign funds, then you're eligible to apply for government funds, then you're eligible to apply for certain projects. And so what happens is that in the first 3 years, you really don't have a lot of options to secure funds. And so that's what's happened to us since from 2022 to 2025. And again, I reiterate, that's why SIOP PARC was such a blessing for us. Now, having reached that stage, we have got our corporate social responsibility in place. So the first funds come from there and the others are in the pipeline. So I think each situation is different. I'm sure Milena will have a similar example of how things are happening in their countries, but that's a summary of what happens in India. Thank you.
Thanks, Ramandeep. Milena, over to you. How do you
Yes.
secure funds?
Well, unfortunately, as Ramandeep has clearly stated, we do not, by 2025, we are still not having secured funding for research. As we are performing a lot of pragmatic clinical trials, the treatment itself is financed by the government, but the investigators, data managers, statisticians needed are not funded by governments. So primarily rely on self-funding. Principal investigators look for alliances and partnerships with certain civil society organizations and foundations. Pharma industry trials are very, very few in number and not a significant contribution to the funding of research in Latin America. And that's why also PARC has been so important, because it has contributed to in a certain way to back up investigators and data managers so as they can perform research through Latin America in a more supported way from the finance point of view. But we do not have, until now, secured financial support for research in Latin America, unfortunately.
Thanks, Milena. You touched upon pharma industry not really funding any research in Gallup or in many of the low and middle income countries. So now that you're a legal entity and a well-established research organization, have you tried to engage with pharma on trying to get any of the newer targeted therapies or the newer advanced molecules which are there, which may have equal or better efficacy with less toxicity, which is quite crucial in some of the situations we see in low and middle income countries? Has there been any movement on that front, or what do you think are the reasons why they are not engaging with Gallup?
Well, I think that as individually, we have had certain pharma industry trials implemented in some centers or countries. I think that globally, as we didn't have a clear legal entity, we were not a clear legal entity, so as to sign a contract, for example. And we did not have a structured administrative an administrative structure in place to assure data quality, timely data quality. Also, we were not accessing clinical trials as Gallup from the pharma industry. But now we started contacting through Foundation S, some experts in clinical trials that partner with pharma industry, but that are started from the clinician and the oncologist's point of view. So maybe there we can build on an alliance that will allow us to move forward pharma industry trials.
Research. Great. Thanks, Milena. Ramandeep, one quick question to you. If you had to set three areas, so you get PARC is supporting for capacity as in manpower as well as training, which is what has been supported so far, capacity building. If you had to add two or three other focus areas in which PARC can help you more, what would those be?
Um, I was trying to think of where the benefit would be. I think from an Infog's perspective, because each collaborative group are on their own journey. So from an Infog's perspective, 90% of the funds which came in round one went into salaries, but now only 30% of funds is going into salaries, right? And so what we are doing now is using the funds for monitoring, and we are using the funds for investigator meetings, because we feel that we have other sources of funds for salaries which we can use. So from our point of view, and I think that goes to SIOP PARC as well, which is uh, besides just providing salary support for staff, what can be done to improve the quality of the work? So, India is a huge country, and I showed we're already doing 5,000 children per year, and we could, achieve in the next few years 7.5, 10,000 per year. But we have to invest in quality. And so, one way would be for the donors to encourage you to submit proposals as to what are you doing to improve quality measures. And that could include whether it's monitoring or databases and things like those. So that's what comes to my mind immediately. The other part, of course, is encouraging them to make sure that it is not, it meets the needs of the country. So there is access to care, and there's patient voice, and there's out-of-pocket. So those are the other things one can look at. Thank you.
Thanks, Ramandeep. I would like to ask Carl to not only close but give his comments on his experience of 4 years with PARC. What does he feel, and where do we think we go from here, PARC, and also to close the meeting. Carl, you're muted, actually.
Thanks so much. This is, even though, as you mentioned, we've been involved with this for several years, this is just so inspiring to see all the amazing work that's been done. And I think this experiment that Kathy Pritchard-Jones and Guillermo Chantada and SIOP leadership started is really starting to become evident. And I think when we look to the future, just thinking about, this 20% of the children with cancer are in the US and Europe, 80% are elsewhere, right? And so I think the need to learn as much as possible to give the best possible care for the 80% is our overwhelming mandate. And I think the curves that we saw from Gallup and for Infog show that this is possible. And I think what PARC can do is, with this mechanism, as was mentioned, really support networks that have been started already, or to form networks, and I think get the highest quality research at each of the sites in these networks, but then also expand the reach of those networks by recruiting new sites, and then eventually connecting those sites to create an international consortia. So I think it's really expanding the reach, but then, as Ramandeep just mentioned, making sure the quality is exceptional. So, improving capacity from registries to observational trials to prospective studies to randomized clinical trials, both at single institutions, regional networks, international networks. I think that's the trajectory that we see. And then I think it's not just approaching the curves that we see in the US and Europe, but there's these leapfrog opportunities to, I think, because of the specific populations, because of the volumes that exist in the rest of the world. We don't have to just follow the same path as the advances that we've made so far. We can really ask innovative new questions. And I think that scientists will see this. I think that pharma will see this as potential for investment. And I think the role of PARC is to kind of coordinate the growth of these networks as they grow from all those years of zero funding to this accelerated curves that are so exciting. And I just want to point out that I've never seen sort of weaning addiction from Excel files as a marker of success, but I think that's a fantastic metric. But I think we also need to listen, and so to listen to our PARC constituents to hear what they need to make the biggest impact. But I think we're unified on our goal to, leverage research to make sure we have the best outcomes and quality of life for children with cancer globally. And I think this session has really shown that there's a lot of inspiring people around the world working on this, and PARC is really privileged to have the opportunity to try to help facilitate this process. So thanks everyone for joining. We really appreciate it. Feel free to send emails to me or anyone on this panel or to Tessie Lobb at SIOP if you have questions. We did have one question about future applications. Things will be coming out in 2026. Just keep following the SIOP webpage for information. We're trying to review the experience from the last 2 years as we design the RFA for the upcoming years. But rest assured, PARC is a priority for SIOP, and our goal is to expand the footprint. So thanks so much. This has really been a privilege.